Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning into yet another episode of our Friday show. We've got Andy Behrens here with us today, co-hosted with Stephie Smalls as usual. And I teased this on Twitter a little bit earlier, but we finally have something better than the 30-second countdown that we've been using for the last couple months now. We invested heavily and got somebody to produce a song for us to open up the show. So I hope you are ready for it. Here we go.
It's Freaky Friday, come on pretty lady, I just wanna dance with you, ooh, 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 ooh. Hey there sexy lady, come and drive me crazy, I just wanna move with you, ooh, 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 yeah.
Now, if that doesn't get the juices flowing for our Friday show, I don't know what will. But, we lost Steph here. We will bring her back in just a second. But while we're waiting on Steph, Andy, why don't you go ahead, let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter. I know you're working on a ton of things all the time, so let everyone know where they can find you and what you've got going on right now.
Yeah, Smalls saw the Troy intro and just dropped. She was like,
That
"Wow,
was enough for her.
All downhill after that." People can find me on Twitter. It's just my name. I'm super easy to find at Andy Behrens. We're producing baseball and football content at Yahoo right now, so I think people generally know they can find me at Yahoo Sports.
Yeah,
I'm trapped in a bunch of drafts right now, by the way. So I apologize if like one of those little horns goes off that signals that it's my draft pick. I tried to put myself on auto pick and shut all those things down, but I'm like in a bunch of slow pick drafts right now. So I got little windows up all over the place here.
Are you doing any of the FC eliminators? That has been the big talk of the last couple of weeks. Is that something you've gotten into at all?
I am actually. I'm hosting one, and I have to say I did not. I've just been like learning the rules today. It's not going to launch until next week. It's a really fun group, and I'm totally enjoying the behind the scenes, behind the curtain Twitter chat. But it's going to be really fun. I like that there's really no position specifics, that I could just throw kickers in there at will, that I can throw anybody in there at will. Oh, look who came back. Hi. Thanks.
We got her.
Thanks for joining us.
I had to do a computer swap really fast. I can't believe how quickly I did that. I don't know what's going on with this laptop. It decided that we don't connect to the internet anymore. So I apologize for that. But honestly, it was probably Troy's song.
Yeah. I just gave everybody a virus that's watching this show. I hope you guys were aware of that. But
we were 100% of new music that I've listened to, like in 2021, is written and produced and sung by Troy. Like that's it. That's the only new music I ever experience anymore.
I mean, it's pretty great. I saw that he really stepped up the production value with the Thirsty Thursday song. Last week, he, just was singing it. And then this week, he added some auto-tune and a couple extra verses in there. So I think we are witnessing the birth of a star in Troy King, like we didn't already know that.
No doubt.
But, we were talking about the FC Eliminator just a little bit before we were going live. And Steph and I were talking about the scoring because I really took a deep dive into that. And there's some wild scoring in there, minus a point for every incompletion, which could really, really hurt you. And then the other thing that shocked me is it's not your normal best ball tournament where it's just, you have to have a QB and 2 running backs and 3 wide receivers. It's just your top 8 guys. So if your top 8 scorers are all kickers, that's what's counting for the week. So it's a very interesting style of best ball that I'm not too familiar with.
I actually really like the way, almost anything that Scott gets involved with, the scoring is super thoughtful. And I like the way they account for, it's not perfect, but I like the use of points for completions and deductions for incompletions and things like that to account for accuracy. It's just one of those little things that can steer us away from, volume being the only thing that drives quarterback scoring.
Right. And with every platform pretty much using the same scoring and so many analysts out there, it's really even the playing field. You're looking at everybody's rankings and having stuff like this where it's a little bit chaotic in a way makes it a little bit more fun because it kind of feels like I'm drafting 10 years ago when we didn't have 1,000 analysts telling exactly what to do and aggregated consensus rankings. So I'm a fan of it. But before we dive into the show, Steph, we've got you back. Thrilled to see you here. Why don't you let everyone know what you've got going on and where they can find you for the next couple days, and then hopefully back to your real account on Sunday.
Yeah. You would think by now I can figure out the technology stuff. We're still not doing fantastic with it. But happy to be here. My real Twitter will be back up and running. I think I did the math and it looks like I'll be back Sunday at 4 a.m. I'm looking forward to it. right now I'm using my burner, which is something I never thought I would ever need, let alone would be in this industry the way that I am. But, I have Small Talk came out this week, my new show Off Topic. I pushed it back because I am using my burner and I would love to reach out to all my followers. So I have some exciting stuff in the works. Very excited that Andy is here. It's like one of my favorite people on Twitter, also as an analyst too. So it's very exciting that he's with us.
I feel like you should raffle off control of the Burner Smalls feed, maybe to one of your followers.
I should. That's an awesome idea. That's how I'm going to pay you, actually, for coming on. What I'll do is I will have someone pay me for the burner, and then I can pay you.
Yeah,
no, I think we might be.
I have a gift for monetizing things. Yeah,
we might be putting the cart before the horse there, because I have a feeling that we're going to be seeing Burner Smalls at least once more this offseason. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive in. Andy, the first thing I want to talk to you about, you follow me on Twitter. We engage every once in a while, and you know that I have a problem with DeAndre Swift. He's just not somebody that I can really buy into because of the pedestrian offense and the history of Detroit Lions running backs. And I heard a show last offseason where you said that if DeAndre Swift didn't get 1,200 scrimmage yards, you'd change your name to Andy Behrens. Andy Behrens. Well, I think we know he came up with 878 scrimmage yards. Even if we were to extrapolate that out to a full 16 games, 1,080 yards. So why don't you go ahead and talk about that a little bit? And while you're doing that, I'm just going to make a quick change to your name right here.
Oh, no. Yeah. I may have made such a declaration. What if we just took like his final 2 games or his final 3 games? Does that get me close? I feel like the process wasn't terrible. I did not properly account for the fact that wherever Adrian Peterson lands, somebody is going to give him 150 carries, which is exactly what happened. And like, by the way, that's like a shoe that has yet to drop this year, and it's going to land somewhere, right? Like Adrian Peterson still wants to play. According to most reporting, he probably needs to play, right? He needs the check still. He's like he can still land in Miami, he can still land in Atlanta, he can still land somewhere and mess up people's dreams for other backs. Yeah, it was a problem. And the mere fact, I think that it's not important whether they sign Todd Gurley or not, but the fact that they are having conversations with Todd Gurley tells us a lot. Everything that they've said about Jamal Williams to this point tells us a lot. And I love DeAndre Swift, the player. And I'm sure in whatever podcast I predicted a 1,200 scrimmage yard season for him, I probably also said that he had my favorite individual game of any player in last year's draft class, which was like the SEC title game against Alabama, where he just clowned people. Like, he's really good. And if they were to give him a full workload, I think it would be great. But I think at this point, the context clues are screaming at us that he's probably still going to be stuck with 12 to 14 touches per game. So he's going to be one of those guys that for me goes into that like J.K. Dobbins bin, where we have a lot of high hopes for the player. And I think we all agree that if they could get 270 touches, it would be spectacular, but there's no path to it.
That's spot on. I mean, DeAndre Swift and J.K. Dobbins are probably the 2 most talented players out of this rookie class, but they're both in these frustrating timeshares. And that's why you see people like Cam Akers, who I don't think is nearly as good as the other 2 guys that we mentioned, but he's getting drafted ahead of them, and he's probably going to see 20, 25 touches a game. So sometimes the opportunity is a little bit more valuable than talent, especially when you're looking at a redraft aspect. So I appreciate you answering that and being a good sport. There aren't many people that'll let us start off the show like that. So I thank you for that, Andy. But let's go on to something else real quickly. When we were talking a while back, you said that you picked up a new hobby, which has been running. I want to hear a little bit about that. A lot of people picked up some not so healthy hobbies. So for you to go out and start running during this pandemic, props to you. And what started that?
Yeah, no, I should say it's not like a new hobby exactly. But as I think people understand during the pandemic, like you only have so many opportunities to get outside, right? And your opportunities to get outdoors probably had to be structured and done with some purpose. And like like everybody else, I lost every other workout opportunity that I was having, right? There's no gym, there's no like pickup hoops, and anything that I was doing, I couldn't do anymore. I was already running a fair amount, and I've done a bunch of marathons and things like that. But it's become the only thing that I do for any, I'm basically online 22 hours a day, and then I'm like running 90 minutes or 2 hours a day. But I've taken it to like I don't know, maybe an embarrassing extreme, right? Like I'm probably going to run like 3,000 miles this year, which is a lot more than I've run in the past, right? It's kind of an obscene amount, but like that's where I do all my podcast listening. That's where like I get a little bit of work done, and whatever. For so long there, it was the only time that you could actually spend outdoors, and it was the only way that I really had to. Like, I'm not a golfer. I don't do all of the other things that people generally do to waste 9 hours out of their week, right? So I've just thrown that all into running.
Now I know you're in the Chicagoland. I don't know if you're actually in Chicago, but I know that was a huge thing where they shut down the lakefront. So that was like a lot of people, they wanted to get out of their house and run, and they couldn't even do that. They were shutting down the parks and the lakefront in Chicago for a while.
Yeah, that's we are in the city. We're in Bucktown, and I routinely will run over to the lakefront. So that kind of sucked. You could still run on the outskirts of the lakefront, but the lakefront path is pretty wonderful, as you know. So losing that for any stretch of time, or feeling that you had to go there like during odd hours when nobody was going to bust you for being there, was a little bit weird.
Breaking the law for a late night run. Yeah, I grew up, but I lived in Lincoln Park for quite some time, and I was just 3 blocks away from the lakefront, and that's just such a fantastic area just to go walk the dogs, get some sunshine. It's beautiful there. But let's go ahead and talk about your career a little bit, because you've been doing this for quite some time, and a lot of people kind of stick to one sport. I see you representing the White Claw there. Absolutely love it. Very on brand for the Friday show. But I want to ask, because a lot of people do one sport. We've had a couple people on the show that do 2 sports. But you do all of it. I mean, you do fantasy football, fantasy baseball, fantasy basketball, and it's not like you're putting in half an effort in any of these. Like, you are a fantastic analyst when it comes to all these sports. So I just want to know how you do it. Like, you do this better than anybody.
Well, first of all, I'm super old, right? Like, and I've done this for a long time. And I started in the industry at a time when there wasn't an option to do one sport, and there weren't a lot of people that were just content only companies, right? Like if you worked in fantasy and you wrote fantasy content, you probably did it for a site that hosted games, and you basically had to do it in support of those games. So almost everybody working in fantasy at the time, whether it was, maybe the Roto World writers were a little bit different and they were sports specific, but if you worked for ESPN and you were Funston or Carabell or Cockcroft, right? Like, you had to write everything. You were a fantasy guy first, and a lot of the analysis was just about playing the game generally. And I should also say that fantasy analysis has just come so far, right? From like, now we have, especially like within baseball and football, the level of analytics that exists that just simply didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. It's such a different landscape. And now when companies hire, they don't think about hiring generalists who are going to cover everything. But that's what we did a million years ago. Like, if you're going to write fantasy, you had to be a full season employee. And there also weren't, nobody was drafting a best ball league in February or March. There wasn't like best ball to support. There wasn't, Dynasty existed. I don't even know if we called it Dynasty, right? But like, it existed, but we weren't building content around it.
Keeper leagues with a lot of keepers. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's a keep everybody league, and then there's a normal keeper league, right? But we certainly weren't building content around it, and we didn't even have the games available to you. Like, you had a dynasty league, but you couldn't even look at it online until June or something like that. So now the landscape is just so radically different, and there's so many great companies out there producing content year round, obviously around everything, and the games themselves exist year round, and that just wasn't the case.
And that was something I was surprised by when we had Matthew Berry on the show. I didn't realize that, now he's 100% a football guy, but when he started in the industry, he was doing a little bit of everything. He was working directly with the NBA as a consultant to help them get fantasy basketball up and running. And he was doing baseball. And I remember I was doing baseball back in the while and reading Eric Carabell, and he was doing his rankings. And it definitely is a little bit more pigeonholed now, but props to you for sticking with it.
I would be in so much trouble if that was the case nowadays. Like, my knowledge about other sports, I will admit, basketball probably would be the next I go to, but me trying to write some fantasy baseball content would be ugly.
Yeah, it's kind of ludicrous to even try to do it now, because I can't, like, football, obviously, the size of the football audience is so much larger than it is for baseball and for basketball. So you really have to, you still have to gear a lot of your year toward producing football content. And if there's one sport that I'm just on all year, it's definitely the NFL. It's definitely football, right? And baseball is more something that I hate to phrase it this way, but you kind of parachute into when you have the availability at the end of football season. And then there's a definite point in the baseball season where you lose a ton of the audience, right around the All-Star break. Just after the All-Star break, people really get into NFL training camps, and half of your baseball league realizes, wow, this is a slog. This is really hard. I have to do this every day. This isn't like football. And I'm in 9th place. So I'm just going to stop paying attention, right? So then your content probably has to pivot because you lose such a huge chunk of the audience.
And that's what, you talk about that, like what a slog it is. Like fantasy basketball, fantasy baseball, you have to be out opening that app multiple times a day, checking for injury updates. And it's tough. And that's what I tell people all the time with fantasy football. If you've never gotten into it before, you need to set aside 15 minutes twice a week. That's it. You got to set your waivers on Tuesday. You got to set your lineup. Well, maybe Thursday, you want to check and get that. But really 2 or 3 times a week, that's all you need to do if you want to play fantasy football. And obviously there's going to be psychos like us that are going to put in a lot more effort. But, you can compete just by putting in that bare minimum realistically.
Yeah, and the nature of it is such that because there's so many surprises each year, and because injuries are so dominant, and like the landscape is just something other than what we expect it to be absolutely every season. You really just need to get, if you get 2 or 3 big things right, and that can be during the draft, or that can be as waiver ads, you have a really good shot to win a league. And it's just not quite like that in baseball, right? Baseball is, as you say, really helps if you can be awake until 1:30 a.m. on the East Coast, right? And to see who blows a save in the West Coast games. And like, that's just hard to do every day for 6 months for grown people.
Yeah. I respect people that are able to play multiple. I've done fantasy basketball for the last couple of years. And now that I've transitioned full-time into football, this is my last year doing basketball. Having to cover the Bulls especially was just brutal this year. I mean, it's not fun when the team that you're covering is mathematically out of the playoffs and, no hope for anything. And then you're trying to pay attention to football while also getting these game recaps. So it was a lot of fun, but I'm officially done with fantasy basketball after this year.
I think I'm sticking with football. Like, I don't think that I will ever reach into those realms. And you guys have both officially knocked it out of the possibility area in my head.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the books that you've written, because I'm sure anybody that's been to your Twitter page before has seen novelist in there, and I looked into it a little bit, and you've had some really successful novels, and one of them was turned into a movie that I saw when I was in high school, Sex Drive, and I want to know what that was like, writing a book and having it turn into a movie. Was that something where you were a part of the process, or how did that come about?
Okay, so at the time, I was writing primarily. Well, I was freelancing for a bunch of different places. I was writing locally for the Chicago Reader, and I was freelancing a lot for ESPN for Page 2 and for Page 3. Loved it. Was doing like maybe a weekly quirky sports feature, fun stuff. There was a day that I followed Journey, the band, around Wrigley Field while they were prepping to do the 7th inning stretch. That was super fun. Like, it was just really fun writing. And somebody reached out to me, and I thought maybe it was like a scam email, but I got an email from someone saying, hey, and at the time, obviously I'm writing, if you're writing for ESPN.com on that section of the site, you're writing primarily for like middle-aged dudes or like young dudes or whatever. And somebody reached out and was like, hey, you should write for teenage girls is what you should do. and I was like, really? Are we sure about that? We sure I should do that? But I was also at a point in my career where I was like, anybody who was willing to pay me for anything, I was like, yeah, I'll go down that road. Sure. And this ends up being how a lot of YA books get written, how a lot of young adult works get written, is there are companies called book packagers that come up with like a 1.5 or 2-page, very rough idea of a plot. And they go find writers. They go find young writers to try to knock it out. And so I wrote a couple of sample chapters off of a really sort of skeletal outline for a book that became the movie Sex Drive. I didn't have to do anything in terms of like selling it, right? Like that book packager had already been in contact with Summit Entertainment. So like before the first draft was turned in, that thing was going to be a movie, which was cool and also had some pressure associated with it. But then I had no leverage in the project either, right? Like I'm just a nobody writer. I'm like a freelance sports writer who agreed to do this thing, and it was super cool, great to be a part of. But I was shut out of the script writing process, right? It wasn't like me and the director and a couple of other writers in a smoky room late at night going over, script edits or anything like that. They basically paid me and said thanks and invited me to the premiere, which was really cool. It was a really fun thing to be a part of. Like that was an awesome night, right? Like I randomly,
awesome.
after having no involvement in the movie, it was a nice payoff for my wife, right? Because I had taken this, the sort of leap of faith into freelance writing, and left a pretty good corporate job to do it. And then there was like just this moment where it was like, okay, we're going to a Hollywood premiere. This is a pretty good payoff for like the last 5 years of me not knowing exactly when I was going to get paid and what for.
That is very cool. I didn't realize that they had projects like that where like, they had the outline and then they had a book and a movie and everything planned. So that was going to be my next question is, how they found the book and what the transaction was like to turn it into a movie. But you answered that for me. That is, I love that kind of those behind the scenes looks at how the entertainment industry works. That isn't something that I realized existed. And that's very cool to learn.
Yeah, no, it's how a huge percentage of that stuff gets written.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I'm like trying to like wrap my brain around it and think about how awesome that was for your wife too. Like putting myself in her shoes to be like, yes, look at this. This is so cool.
But also,
you know who was at the Summit brought all these like stars from movies that were about to come out and had already come out to the premiere. So like I consume no non-sports culture, so I'm terrible with names, even big stars' names. So who's the guy who played the vampire that everybody liked in Twilight? Who's that guy?
You got this one, Steph. Come on.
Huge star.
Edwin Cullen, or is that his name in the book?
I won't even know the name. He was like the dreamy vampire.
He was Batman too, right?
What's his name?
Pattinson,
Batman.
something Pattinson. Robert Pattinson.
Yeah,
Robert Pattinson.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Before Twilight came out, he like was at the premiere of this thing, and we were just like chatting with this guy who ended up being this huge star. My wife like knew he was going to be a huge star too. To me, he was just somebody who like he was a child, right? Like I don't know. So it was fun. It was that sort of scene.
That's awesome. And then I love that you mentioned Page 2 because that's something, you said it was directed towards middle-aged people, but I was reading that when I was in high school and I thought Page 2 was some of the coolest stuff. Just today, Hunter S. Thompson is somebody that I really look up to, really like his stuff. And he used to write for Page 2 as well. So, I mean, there have been some big guys that have come through and done some freelance work for ESPN Page 2. I missed that quite a bit. There was some really cool content on that site.
I really thought I was out of my depth just being on those email chains, because the email chain would be like, Ralph Wiley, and not that Hunter S. Thompson ever responded to anything, but I'm pretty sure he's on the email chain, and Simmons is on the email chains, right? And it's just like a big, editorial back and forth that like I always felt really sheepish contributing to, because who am I, right? But it was cool. It was a great experience.
Oh, I bet.
So of all the books that you've written, which one would you say there's a character that kind of resembles yourself? Because there has to be some of you that comes through these characters. I find it hard to believe that there isn't.
I don't think I'm a good enough writer that like my voice isn't in every character, right? In fact, I think if I go back and read the things that I was writing as fiction 15 years ago, that's like one of the things that I always think is like, wow, I didn't really differentiate these characters enough. I'm all of these people. But there was the protagonist in the last thing the final thing I wrote basically to satisfy the contract that I had with the book packager, right, was more for middle grade boys. It was this book called The Fast and the Furriest. And that actually sold pretty well because that got in those Scholastic readers that kids take home at school, right? And it had a nice cover and all that. So a fair number of people bought that. That was fun to do. And that was more like a, suburban kid who starts entering dog agility contests with his out of shape dog. And, they obviously it's a kid's book, so they triumph in the end. It was really fun. And like his voice has a lot of me in it. But again, most of the characters that I wrote had a lot of me in it because I'm not so thoughtful a writer that I could do anything else.
Yeah, I read a few pages out of that one, and I saw now that, I think they stopped producing it because I looked on Amazon, and the selling rate for that book right now, I don't know if you've seen, a paperback copy is $900 on Amazon. So
Oh,
I don't know
get
if
out
you're
of
getting a
here.
cut of that. Yep, $900
I mean,
per
I'm getting a
issue
cut,
on
but
Amazon.
I'm not getting my fair share of 900.
Whoa,
I'll tell you
what the
that.
heck? Why are you
Yeah.
making us pay you to come on, huh?
So Andy, we've been doing the show for a few months now, and one of the really fun parts is that we get to have people on that work with other people. And a few weeks ago, we had Matt Harmon, also with Yahoo Sports. He joined us, and he told us a pretty funny story. So I'm just going to throw this question up here because he asked that I throw this one out to you. So why did you fire your brand ambassador, Charlie? And he wants you to know that it is killing your career. So why don't you go ahead and let the audience know what this is about?
It's a fair point. Charlie is Harmon's dog, one of two dogs, his original dog. And I don't remember the exact circumstances because they're like, we're at a bar. The exact circumstances are kind of lost to history. But at some point, the conversation went to his dog, and at some point I decided to make his dog my Twitter avatar. I don't know why that was. I think it was Harmon giving me crap because I'd never changed my Twitter avatar in, however many years of being on Twitter, like 7 years of being on Twitter. I'd never touched it, never changed it. And he was like, you should mix it up. And I was like, fine, give me a picture of your dog. And I put a picture of his dog as my Twitter avatar. And there it sat for, I don't know, a year and a half, something like that. Why is he no longer, which was also, it was really fun because people would reach out to me on Twitter and they'd be like, hey, that's an adorable dog. And I'd be like, thanks, it's not mine. But why did I decide to go away from Charlie? Couple reasons. One, Charlie's politics are really problematic. Really problematic. I mean, Charlie can believe whatever Charlie wants, but when it starts to affect my followers, right? Like I gotta step away. Also, Charlie's ego is pretty out of control, and Charlie's greed is pretty out of control. Like every new follower, Charlie wants a treat. Charlie wants this. Charlie wants that. I can't.
Yeah, we can't do greed.
Yeah, I was living my life in service of Charlie, and that's
right.
That's Matt's job. That's Harmon's job.
Well, Matt is out here saying that your career is failing since you fired Charlie. I think that you are doing just fine without him, but I'll be sure to clip this and send it to Matt so he can get the full breakdown of this one. But we've talked about your history as a fantasy sports writer a little bit. We talked about your history as a novelist a little bit. Something else I want to talk about, a venture of yours, is FSWA, the Fantasy Sports Writers Association. First time I ever had contact with you was applying for this. And I, saw your email pop up in my inbox and couldn't believe that I was getting an email from Andy Behrens himself. But for those in the audience that are unfamiliar, can you explain what you guys do over at the FSWA and what the benefit of joining that for any aspiring writers would be?
Yeah, so it was founded a long time ago and not by me, right? Like back in, I want to say 2005, at a point in the history of fantasy content when fantasy itself wasn't taken particularly seriously. It was super niche. It was, the notion was it was like a little corner of the sports world. And we wanted to recognize, the industry itself wanted to recognize the quality of content that was being produced by people who were writing primarily for fantasy, because, at the time, mainstream sports writing, if you wanted to find any real depth of analysis, there's a good chance you probably had to look to the fantasy pages in order to do it, right? There was some really good stuff being produced, and it wasn't being put on the same level as a lot of mainstream sports writing. And of course, everything has changed. Like 16 years later, we're at a point where, I mean, I don't know if anybody takes you seriously as a sports fan if you're not playing fantasy, right? If you don't have that level of engagement, but it wasn't always that way. I mean, it used to just be like a thing that, that players didn't get it. They didn't recognize the value of it. And certainly sports writers generally didn't recognize the value of it. And I think as people play, they realize that it makes them that much better informed as fans. So we've come a long way as an industry, obviously. And it was a way early on just to recognize the best work that goes on in fantasy. And now we've expanded the number of, we basically exist today to still continue to recognize the best producers of content in the industry, but it's no longer just written content, and it's no longer just like 4 or 5 awards, right? We have 20 plus awards across different categories. We have video stuff, we have audio stuff, we have podcast awards across like 3 different categories. So the awards have really expanded, and it exists now as a way to recognize the best work that goes on within the industry. And hopefully we'll get to a point where we can actually have some get-togethers too.
Yeah, I think that's what everybody's hoping for right now, is that we can all start, just meeting up, doing the expos and the conventions and all that good stuff. Hopefully, we'll be there in August in Canton for anyone else that is going to be joining. But we do have Jeff Bell out here asking, how does one join this? I assume he's talking about the FSWA.
I'm seeing that question. So just head over to fswa.org. It's super simple to file the little application process, and there's really not a whole lot to it. You're going to have to send me a few links to prove that you've actually done this for more than a year or so. But beyond that, the other nice thing about it, we're not like, we don't ever hand out asking for money every year. It's like a one-time membership fee that basically covers, the awards process is really hard each year. It is difficult behind the scenes. There are the number of submissions that we get now is pretty crazy for the number of people that are actually involved in administering it, right? Like, so that's hard. So you're covering some of those costs. You're covering some site maintenance costs, but it's like, we'll never ask you for money again. We ask you for money one time when you join, and that's it. So nobody's making any money off this. I can guarantee that.
So let me ask you then, because your job title over there is the enforcer. What exactly does that mean? Like, if somebody doesn't pay up, if somebody, submits an application, they've only been writing for 9 months, like, are you going to show up and break their legs? What does the enforcer do exactly?
I've rarely actually had to enforce. I think I am technically the president. There's really not a whole lot of enforcement that goes on there. I do have to make sure that it's one of those things that somebody just needs to sort of steer the ship a little bit. And over time, we've largely me, but also with committees of other people that are associated with the fantasy industry, we've broadened the awards a little bit. We've expanded the awards a little bit. So we've done, we've made some positive changes, I think, over the years. I've never really had to enforce anything on anyone. We have no hard and fast rules. It's fantasy.
Well, I just joined a few months ago, so I'm looking forward to being involved in the award process and all of that this upcoming year. Love what you guys are doing over there, and it's a very cool way just to kind of give an extra feel of a community to this industry that we work in. So appreciate the work that you put in there. So like I said, we've had a lot of people on this show, and one thing that we've noticed is a lot of people say that, like, from day one, they knew that they wanted to be a sports writer. They went into, to journalism, and we've had some people that were, taking stats at high school games to break into the industry. But when I looked at you, you had a career as a writer, and you had some other stuff beforehand. And from the time you graduated college until you got into your spot at Yahoo, there was a 14-year gap there. So I'm wondering, what made you decide to take that leap from what you were doing to getting into fantasy sports?
Yeah, well, I tried out of college to be a sports writer, and this would have been 93, 94, I guess. And I was, as obviously some of your other guests were as well, I was a stringer for, local papers covering every possible high school sport except for the high profile ones, right? Like, I got all the, it was fun, super fun. And it teaches you to interview, and it teaches you, to get comfortable with sports that you didn't necessarily play, right? Like, but yeah, I was covering volleyball and soccer and badminton and pretty much anything. But when you're doing that, at least in the mid 90s, you were doing that for like $15 a pop, right? Which you can't like start a life on $15 to write a blurb about the boys volleyball match, and it takes you 90 minutes to do it, right? Like, it takes a huge time commitment. So that was super difficult, and nobody was, it's like pre-internet days, so nobody's handing you a column. There aren't social platforms that I could go on and elevate my voice and start creating content from nowhere. Somebody needed to give me a platform to do it, and that stuff is hard. And then I worked super briefly for a trade publication because I was an English major. I was just trying to stay in writing in any way I could. And that didn't pay anything, right? Like, it was called Modern Baking. and I had to like, I don't know, I don't know anything about baking. Obviously, I have no baking background, and they're like, okay, you're going to write the definitive piece on decorative cake stands, and then you're going to write the definitive piece on industrial ovens. And like, I don't know any of that stuff, and it took forever. And they paid you like $400 every 2 weeks, right? So like that's hard too. And so I was like, fine, I'll write on my own, and I'll go get this corporate job. And I did that for a while, and then we reached a point where like my daughter was born, and I decided to stay home with her and launch a freelance writing career, and had a few more opportunities later in time. And that was when like, okay, now there's platforms now there's an internet, now there's places that I can write, and I don't have to worry about, working my way up the hierarchy at a daily paper.
Yeah, the internet has changed things so much. People that, just want to get into writing, anybody that wants to can start up a blog and hope to get found. So, we are lucky to be going after this in this time, because hearing people like yourself that were, back in the 90s and even 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't the same. And hearing how hard it was to break into that industry, it's definitely nice for people like Steph and myself to be able to really just instantly have a platform and be able to start sharing our content.
When I hear like you talk about that, I feel so fortunate, because I was just a medical student, tweeting about football, and here I am now, 7 months later, and I work for FTN, and now I'm putting out content, not knowing that this was ever going to happen. But Twitter gave, I feel so fortunate for Twitter for that reason, because, I talk about a career path change. Like, we're talking from being an ER doctor to now talking about football the rest of my life, hopefully. But I feel very fortunate to have this platform, as much as, it's a pain in my butt sometimes. You go to Twitter jail, you don't have access to your account, but really, I have so much respect, because we, Dave and I, we don't have as much of that, we didn't have to fight as hard like that.
And like, who needs another ER doctor? Now you're doing something that's really socially responsible and benefits society in a way that healing people. What is that?
Yeah,
please,
really.
Who needs that?
I'd much rather get Steph's rankings than her, you feel a bullet wound or something like that. But Andy, I don't know if you remember this interaction you and I had. It was just a few weeks ago, and it was after Rashad Bateman got drafted by the Baltimore Ravens. And I said, Lamar Jackson was my QB2, and now he is my QB2 even harder. And you said, just go for it, man. Make him your QB1. And I was so afraid to go against the consensus. Everybody says Patrick Mahomes is their QB1. And I was terrified to have anybody besides Patrick Mahomes as my QB1 for the sake of getting labeled hot takey, whatever it may be. So I want to ask you, how do you put your sort of against the consensus rankings out there without feeling like you're going to get labeled as clickbaity or a hack or something like that?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to approach ranks, and I feel like 10 years ago, the way I would produce rankings was super conservative, and they were, if we're just talking about like accuracy of rankings and how they might, I don't know, grade out in some big competition or whatever, I was probably producing ranks that suited that environment, right? But they also didn't make a statement. And the person I always think of in this regard is Brad Evans of FTN. You can look at Brad's ranks and there's nothing ambiguous about it. Like, if he loves or hates a player, because he like dramatic swings in their weekly placement. And that's really useful to people who play the game. Especially like the vast majority of people who play the game, who are not in our small community of folks who produce content and consume content, every day out of the year, 20 hours a day. Most people who play fantasy football check in as the person you were describing earlier, right? They check in for 15-minute increments a couple times a week, and they want something clear and decisive. And like Brad gives that to them. And one of the things that I've tried to take from Brad for better or worse is like, if you look at my ranks, I want you to have an understanding of who I'm really in on, like where I've really planted a flag and who I'm out on. And I feel like I've gotten better at that. It may make you worse in terms of like, because you have to take strong stands and make strong statements, and it might make you a little bit worse in accuracy competitions. But I think it makes you more useful to the average user. So I've tried to do a lot of that. And the other thing with Lamar is if you do any projecting, it's really hard to get him out of your top 3 or 5. And I know he didn't finish there last year, but it's really hard to not, like, you do any level of forecasting, it's really hard to say that Lamar Jackson isn't going to rush for 900 yards. And that's just a stupid advantage. In any scoring system, a quarterback who's going to rush for, like, he's probably going to rush for 1,000 yards, but you do a little forecasting and it comes in, maybe it comes in 880. Nobody else is close to that. I think he's actually the best, regardless of position. I think it's like him, Saquon. I don't know. It's a short tier of the best runners in the league. There's not many guys in that tier, and he's there. So I think he's like literally one of the best runners in the league, and that's just a massive fantasy advantage. So I kind of feel like the argument ought to begin with the guy who's gonna rush for 1,000 yards, and then we need to find a bunch of reasons why that guy wouldn't be the number 1 quarterback. And his receiving core is so much better. I love Bateman. I love everything they've done. Like there's no reason at all. Yeah, there's no reason that he can't get back. He doesn't have to get all the way back to like 36 touchdowns or whatever it was. But if he throws 30 touchdown passes and runs for 1,000 yards, like, good luck catching that guy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Something else I wanted to mention, and just kind of off the cuff here, since you brought up Brad Evans, and I'm a Chicago guy, you're a Chicago guy, Adam Rank, Mike Tagliari, Kyle Yates, Liz Loza. What is it about Chicago that just breeds so many fantasy analysts? Like, why is it that so many people in this industry come out of Chicago?
It's funny. Yahoo did this. We did this. It wasn't exactly a contest, but they did this user study years ago where they tried to figure out where they had the greatest fantasy engagement among all NFL cities, right? And it was just a big old cluster in the Midwest, right? Like our per capita fantasy users in like Green Bay was number 1. I had to actually drive myself to Green Bay and present the mayor of Green Bay with this big golf tournament style check or something. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but like, it's Green Bay, it's Chicago, it's Pittsburgh is in there, but it's, for the most part, it's like Midwestern cities. And I don't know, man, it's so I mean, it's like this in the South as well, but it's just so woven into your college life and in your high school life. And people define themselves by their NFL teams to such a heavy extent. Like my Bears fandom is not seasonal and it's not negotiable. And I don't remember ever not being a Bears fan. Right. And I know that people feel that way in other cities too, but it's just, it's something about the city that really the city itself will kind of lock arms and defend its players and defend its teams. And there's just, I don't know, that's the Midwest, man. Maybe it's just that there's not a lot to do here other than sports.
You're only preaching to my soul right now.
My idea, and something I've realized, just and I don't know if there's any data behind this, but it seems like the colder the winters are, the more diehard the football fans are. Like Los Angeles, they don't really have. I think Dallas might kind of be the anomaly. Like Dallas has a lot of crazy fans, but really, I think it's something about like the cold winters. That's what gets you through those cold winters, man. Just watching football, drinking beer, just rooting for your team. That's a nice way to spend 4.5 months out of your winter.
And that's what you do. You grow up inside. Like, you're inside with your family, like, from such a young age. That's part of, like, those are traditions that I had from such a young age, like it was Sundays were like meatball spaghetti and sit your butt on the couch. We're watching the Giants. Like, we don't have an option. That's what we have to do. But talking, we're on the topic of quarterbacks. Let's talk about this 0 quarterback ordeal, because it's something I will admit that I do very often. Why don't you talk about that approach this year?
Oh my God, it's one of the many drafts that I'm trapped in right now. One of these slow moving drafts that goes on for 2 weeks. One of them is the Razzball guys have started up a couple of things, and one of them is this startup Superflex Dynasty thing. And I was drafting 10th. That's the real hook, right? So like, you guys may know that every year I do these little videos that pop up in your Yahoo draft where I tell you a little something about your draft position and, hey, here's who's going there and here's how it does historically. Well, one of the things that when you do that becomes very clear, because I always ask the engineers for a little bit of research on draft pick winning percentages and all that. One of the things that becomes really clear, not that you don't know this already, is that drafts are unfair. But like, it's not fair. you're better off at the top of a draft. You definitively across any sport. I know people ask this question sometimes. Oh, if you could pick any spot in the draft, where would you pick? Pick number one, and then your next choice should be number two, and then your next choice should be number three. Like, we have decades of data at Yahoo, and I'm here to tell you, it doesn't mean everything. Doesn't mean everything. It doesn't mean that you can't win from 12. People have, people do it every year, but your odds of winning and the overall winning percentages are just lower if you're drafting near the turn. And so I pulled the 10th pick in this thing, and my philosophy when I'm picking anywhere near the turn like that is that I cannot just chase the position that's been drafted to death already, right? So, like, this is a super flex. I'm picking 10th, and in those first 9 picks, 7 quarterbacks were gone. And so, like, I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll get Joe Burrow in the first round of a fantasy draft, and I couldn't even get Joe Burrow. So, like,
you're not taking Baker Mayfield in the first.
Right. Well, you say that, but he went in like the third, because 12 owners in this thing, 12 different managers in this thing, 4 of them went quarterback at the top. And, like, if you do that from the 12th spot, your quarterbacks aren't even that good, right? You're not even going to feel that good about it. You're just chasing a position because of the way the draft started. And so if this is a really long way of saying that if I'm picking near the turn like that, that's where I'll pivot to something like 0 RB or 0 QB in this case, right? Like, I gave myself a terrible quarterback situation, no doubt, because I waited until round 7 in this thing to draft it, which is almost suicidal. And I mapped it out in my head, and I thought that I would get 2 guys from this range of, like, I'm not just pandering to your Giants fandom here. I wanted Daniel Jones. I wanted Daniel Jones to be one of the guys that I got in this Superflex thing, because there's a rushing component to his game. They've added all these weapons, right? He's still young. But I thought he was going to be an option, and Darnold was going to be an option, and Fitzpatrick was going to be like a, in case of emergency, break glass option. And I end up with Fitz and Darnold, which is terrible. But if I drafted Kirk Cousins in the 4th, I'd still have the worst quarterback situation. It wouldn't have changed anything, right? So this way, I was at least able to lean into a couple of positions, so I have clear strengths, right? Like, I had the best running back situation. I have Saquon, I have Cam Akers, I have Najee Harris, I've got Gaskin, I'm rock solid there. I have one of the best wide receiver situations. I have CeeDee Lamb, I've got Devontae Smith, I've got Robinson. It's good. It's good everywhere but the most important position. But at least I figured some things out. Like, I feel like if you're picking near the turn, you got to position yourself to win somewhere. You have to have the best of something. And that's where I'll take Kelsey. That's where I'll take Tyreek Hill. Exactly. I don't want to just take, like, the 8th or 9th best running back or quarterback.
And
you're making me realize that this is why I'm 0 QB, is because genetically it's impossible for me to have a draft position other than the 112 or 111. Like, literally, it's actually genetically impossible. So I either get 102 or 111 or 112. So this season, other than one of the drafts, actually, Dave, I think I'm 102 in one of them and then 112 or 111 in the other. But literally every single draft, I get 112 or 111. So I found myself becoming 0 QB because at that point, there's not really guys that I want there. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take Saquon. I'm going to take Kelsey, take Kittle, someone like that, and go around the turn and at least amplify that one position, because you know what? I'm going to wait. You guys are probably going to sleep on Tannehill. I could take him in the 5th and then grab Daniel Jones, and we could just go about our merry way. And I have a solid RB core at least.
We just
I will say if I could do it again, I would probably jump in round 5 instead of, because there were like 6 quarterbacks that went after, I think I took Devontae Smith in round 6 or something like that. And then there were boom, 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 all these quarterbacks that I thought I might land.
So
that may have been a mistake. But Devontae Smith is good, man. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no matter what, the Eagles will be trash next year, and you're still going to get targets out of that guy.
Yes, yeah.
But I was just in a startup with Steph a few weeks ago, and you were drafting from the 12 spot. And sure enough, only one one running back was taken in the first 11 picks. 10 of those 11 picks were quarterbacks. And then it got to Steph. McCaffrey was the only wide running back taken. And then she walked out with Saquon and Dalvin Cook with her first 2 picks. Yeah. Who gets to build a team with Saquon and Dalvin Cook? You don't get much better than that. And I think if you're picking late in Superflex, the first Superflex startup I ever did, I fell victim to thinking, wow, I need to get my quarterbacks right now. And I ended up with 2 garbage quarterbacks. And then by the time it came back to me in the 3rd and 4th round, all the good running backs were gone. And it is the worst team I've ever seen. So, yeah, I think that's the move is if you're picking late, just go 0 quarterback.
It's funny. I don't know, Dave, if you even saw. So, like, the 0 QB, there is a little bit to it. Like, you can go ahead, you get all these guys, and then, like, I just got Trevor Lawrence, right, for Dobbins and, like, a 23 third or something. Like, who cares then? Did it really matter? Like, you got Dobbins, cool. I still have Gibson, Saquon, and whoever else is on my team. So I think that there, you know, as long as you know how to trade well, you can look at your league and look at who's lacking. So it's fine, but I kind of stashed a bunch of guys, and now I have Trevor Lawrence and Daniel Jones and Goff. Okay, we'll make something work out of it. Like, that's okay. I'm down with it. At least my wide receiver core is dope, and I think there is ways around it, but you got to be prepared. If you're genetically set up to have 112 like me, slide into my DMs. We can talk about it. It's something I have known for like a decade now. So I've gotten used to it at this point. I know. I mean, as Dave saw, we're in 1 week together. I just traded Judy and Daniel Jones straight up. Cool, great. Now I have a
now you got the quarterback.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
And I thought when you were saying the 0 QB,
I feel like one of the lessons. I was going to say, I feel like one of the lessons of last year is that having a huge positional advantage, regardless of whatever the position is, like if you had Travis Kelce last year, it erased so many mistakes. And almost every team that I had that won titles, they were Kelce teams. And the gap, and not to say that he's going to have that same gap this year, but if you can find that massive positional advantage, that's what wins. And like, you know, just chasing after positions because everybody's already drafted it is just never going to get you where you want to go.
Never.
Yeah, getting that guy, you know, Josh Allen last year, Travis Kelce last year, Lamar Jackson the year before, those guys just make it easy. You know, you don't have to do that much else when you're getting, you know, a 5 to 10 point advantage on one spot guaranteed every single week. But you know, what I was going to say, you know, when you were saying 0 QB, I've seen a couple of your tweets about it. I thought it was a little tongue in cheek at first, but you know, you make a really good point that if you're drafting late, I think that is the way to go. But obviously, we've got Andy on the show here. We would be crazy not to talk a little bit of Bears talk. For anyone that can't see it, do you want to lean back a little bit and show everyone the shirt that you're wearing today?
Yeah, I'll give you the shirt. I'll give you the
fantastic
Justin Fields shirt. I'm so excited.
Yes,
Absolutely
and you guys are welcome. First of all, I would like to hear both of you.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen.
Who gave you that? That was a treat for both of you. And you're welcome. It's so funny because I tweeted out at Dave, like, I think right when it happened was, I'm so happy for people like Dave today. You know what? Like, I was able to collect another first round, and I was able to see my friends, you know, Andy, Dave, all my people, Adam Rank, everyone's so happy, Brad Evans. So you guys are welcome, is all I have to say.
Well, thank you, Giants organization, for this. I'm excited. Andy, I know you're excited, but one simple question that nobody really has the answer to, but when do you think Justin Fields is going to take the field for the Bears for the first time?
Oh man, this is such a difficult situation for Nagy, for Andy Dalton. I almost feel, I mean, I was disappointed when they brought Dalton to Chicago, but I feel a little bad for him now because nobody wants to see Andy Dalton. There is not, you know, the polling on this, if polling existed on who Bears fans want to see, is like 99 to 1%, right? Like everybody wants to see Justin Fields. There's going to be absolute unanimity on this. Every time Andy Dalton throws an incompletion, when are we going to see Fields? Plus, the season opens with kind of a rough first month, or at least first 3 games. It's the Rams, it's the Bengals, it's the Browns. That can be 1 and 2. That could be 0 and 3. Like, the Bengals are a frisky offense that you're going to have to keep pace with. That's tough. And there's just no way that the Bears start 0 and 2 or 1 and 2, and we don't see Justin Fields, and we don't see that era begin fully and immediately, right? Like, people are just not going to stand for it. Nagy's going to be on a bit of a hot seat, and what I really hope is that Fields just forces their hands in preseason, in camp, because if it's close, he should get on the field. Because generally speaking, I know it wasn't this way with Mahomes, but that was a super special set of circumstances. Generally speaking, when a quarterback gets drafted this high, you got to get them on the field as soon as possible. Teams play these guys. So I think it's going to happen early. I think it probably happens in September, October at the latest. And again, I feel like Andy Dalton's fine. Like he's probably one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the world still, and I'm sure there's a home for him somewhere, but it's just not here. Like Justin Fields has to play.
I completely agree with you. I think that after week 3 makes the most sense because we know the Lions. You know, I'm happy that they've got themselves a new head coach and whatever.
That's the other thing. They get the Lions and the Raiders right after that, right? Yeah.
So if that's where he can get his first 2 games, a home game against the Lions and then on the road against the Raiders, I think that's a nice way. Not that any game is easy in the NFL. I mean, these are all NFL teams. No disrespect to any of them, but that is kind of a nice introduction into the NFL is getting the Lions at home. So I think that makes the most sense. As much as I'd love him to just outright win the job in camp, that first game being Sunday night in Los Angeles is certainly a scary game. So, if he does well enough to win the job, I'd be more than happy to see it. But I think week 3 against the Lions makes the most sense the more that I think about it. All right, got another question for you with you being a Chicago guy. And this is kind of a 2-parter that I don't even know why I bunched these together. It really makes no sense to bunch these together. But how many games are the Bears going to win this year? And what is your favorite pizza place in Chicago?
You're acting like me, Dave. That's so
as I just read it, I'm like, why in the heck did I lump these together? But
pizza place by man, that's such a fraught question. Because I feel like there's the pizza for your friends and family that are visiting from out of town, and then there's like the pizza that you actually eat, and those are 2 different things. Like I hate it. I hate to have people out there thinking that like Chicagoans are just eating deep dish pizza. We'd all die. No one we would be the heart attack capital of maybe we are, I don't know, but we would definitely be the heart attack capital of the world. The ER doctor would know it. Like if we were just eating deep dish pizza like every second or third meal, like that is not a survivable situation. So no one does that. No, at least no one who's made it to 40 does that. Like that's just not something you could absolutely live through. There's just no way. So nobody does that. But like when people come in from out of town and they want good, deep dish pizza, there are a handful of like under the radar places that I will occasionally order from. Art of Pizza is really good. Pizzeria Aura is really good. The big places are fine. Malnati's is fine. Giordano's is fine. And there's a million Giordano's all over the city, and you can always get seated, so that's an easy thing to stumble into. But if we're ordering and I want people to experience something that's really great, I might go Art of Pizza. But it's a dive. It's just like a little mini mart sort of place. But it's really good.
I love Art of Pizza.
My Pie is really good too, but like the My Pie locations where you used to be able to sit down, I think are basically no longer there. It's just like little divey places too. But My Pie is really good.
Have you had Pequods before? Is that something?
Oh yeah, love it. I love it to the point that I don't like to mention it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a hidden spot. So
there's the separate list for platinum members where I'll talk about places that I will actually go myself.
That list.
So I don't think they have it anymore, but I used to live about a block away from Pequods, and this was when I was I moved to the city when I was 19 years old, lived there for a few years, and they used to have a lunch special where you would get a mini pizza and a beer for $5. So any draft beer you wanted and a mini pizza for $5. And I think that's all I ate for about 3 years. Every single day for lunch, I'd walk over to Pequods, I'd get my little pizza, I'd have my beer, and that was pretty much my fuel for life. But
oh my gosh,
Pequods is a great place. All right,
Pequods is the greatest drunk food. Like it is the absolute best drunk food.
And
Dave, we are getting that when I come to Chicago.
We are, absolutely. And there was a picture of it that just went viral because what they do is they put cheese inside the pan before the crust, so the cheese burns around the outside, and it looks disgusting. I'll be the first to admit it looks terrible, but man, it tastes amazing.
Fantastic, though.
All right, we got one more question for you here, Andy, and of course it's another Bears question. Justin Fields, I think it's safe to say that once he takes the field, he is going to be, low-end QB1 at the worst. David Montgomery, he's back in the RB2 conversation where he was last year. And then Allen Robinson is just perennially a low-end wide receiver 1 at this point. Is there anybody else on the Bears that fantasy people should be concerned about or looking at, I should say?
Yeah, well, I think potentially the buzziest name, and people are already pretty wise to him, is Darnell Mooney. He's someone who just in his first season, and it never showed up in the stats. Like, they targeted him a fair amount, but man, I should have his reception perception data at my fingertips, because I feel like he got separation so easily and so quickly, and he's one of those guys who's fast, where it was apparent immediately. Like, it was game speed. Like, it translated to game speed super quickly. Unfortunately, like, the Bears offensive line couldn't block anything. So, like, there was never 4 seconds for a play to develop, right? But when they isolated him on, like, the best cornerbacks that he cooked Jalen Ramsey a couple times, and they didn't lead to anything. They didn't lead to receptions, but he burned him. But he kind of caught Ramsey peeking, and he blew right by. Like that guy's good, and given time to throw and the right, this is one of the things about Justin Fields is almost nobody was better with the deep ball at the college level over the last 2 years. I think the stat from PFF was that on throws 30 plus yards downfield, he had 18 touchdown passes and no interceptions. Like, he was really good at the deep ball, and that is going to be Darnell Mooney's specialty. I don't know that he's not going to see 100 targets. He might see 80 targets, but if he can convert 45 of those, you're talking about a huge yardage season and the possibility of 8-9 touchdowns.
I love it. When I asked you that question, I was setting you up because I wanted you to talk about Darnell Mooney, and I'm glad that you just walked right into it, because that's exactly what I wanted to hear. I love Darnell Mooney. He was so good last year, and it's just either, like you said, they wouldn't have the time for the play to fully develop. Either that, or Mitch Trubisky just wasn't looking downfield and was just locked in on Allen Robinson, or Nick Foles would say, "Oh wow, he's wide open," and then throw the ball 25 feet away from him. I mean, it was just it was rough to see. But anyway, I want to thank you so much for coming on, Andy. I mean, absolute legend. Just so happy that we could have you on. I've been consuming your content for a long, long time. So getting the opportunity to do this today was just a bucket lister for me. Steph and I, we're going to be taking next weekend off, but you can find us the following week with CBS Sports, Jamie Eisenberg. So we will see you then. Before we sign off,
good.
Oh yeah, Jamie Eisenberg. We've got a nice list. We got I don't know, I have them all off the top of my head. We got Jamie Eisenberg, Sigmund Bloom, Adam Rank,
McDowell, right?
Yeah, Ryan McDowell and JJ Zachariason. We got a nice guest list coming up here. It'll be a good time. I'm looking forward to it.
Wow, you guys could afford JJ's fee as well? That's incredible.
Yeah.
Very expensive. Not as expensive as you, but quite expensive.
Like I said, we've just got endless funds at this point. Now that we got picked up by Elon, we're just funded solely on Dogecoin at this point. So just buy your Dogecoin and hold, and we'll keep getting the great guests on the show.
Wait till White Claw sponsors us. We are going to be throwing bills to everyone. Like
when White Claw sponsors us, yeah, we're going to be doing White Claw keg stands in a few weeks. Just wait for it. But Steph,
how did they not sponsor you already? How is that? How is that not a thing?
I have decided that, they have 6 months. I think that started last month. So now we're at 5 months to sponsor me, or I'm going to switch over. And this is a threat. It's not.
Yeah, I gotta believe truly must be calling, right?
No one's calling. Come on, guys. Like, today
they're all hitting up Stephie's calls, and she can't get the DMs because she's locked out.
I easily pay all of HR's salary at White Claw. Like, there is a 0% chance that is not the way. I went today, I did the cam return, felt like a kid again. It was very fun because I remember like being with my dad and putting the things in. I made $5.25, to be honest. And like, that's a lot of cans if you don't understand the math. Divide that by 5 cents. But yeah, I think that it's a little bit offensive at this point that we are not sponsored.
It really is.
Well, Steph, why don't you let everyone know where they can find you? Right now, I see we still got Stephie Smalls up there, but that is not where they can find you right now. So if you want to let everyone know where they can find you for the next couple of days, and then I know you got a new show coming out too. So why don't you go ahead and plug that before we log off?
Of course. So you guys can find me at Burner Smalls with 3 L's. And on Sunday at 4 a.m., you can find me back on, on my page at Stephie Smalls with 3 L's. And yes, I have Small Talk just came out this past Wednesday. We'll have another episode of that. And then off topic, we did push back, but a really cool guest coming on. Very excited. A lot of, a Super Bowl Giants guys that I've had connections with for a little bit. So I'm very excited for my first episode to come out with. I'm trying to space them out. I have these cool guests. I'm like, we can't make it too Giantsy. So how do we space it out so that it doesn't get a little overwhelming? But Andy, for real, Dave knows that I'm not great with names. I'm not great with following, but Andy, you are someone that I have followed for a very long time. So it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on this show.
Oh, this was really fun. You guys are great. And it's been great getting to know you. I don't know, over the last year. I feel like I've been trapped online with a lot of people, and it's been wonderful getting to know both of you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for coming on. We will see you guys in 2 weeks. I'm Dave Kluge.
And I'm Stephie Smalls.
And thank you for tuning in.